I have often said that the lure of flying is the lure of beauty.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the keynote address of the 54th International Conference of Horse Racing Authorities, which is organized by the IFHA. My name is Jim Gagliano, and I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer of the U.S. Jockey Club, and one of the 3 Vice Chairmen of the IFHA. Today, it is my privilege to introduce you to this year's keynote speakers. Peter Giorgio and Alan Switzer are from Deloitte, the largest global professional services network, and together, they're going to jointly deliver the keynote address. Mr. Giorgio, a principal with Deloitte Consulting, leads the company's U.S. sports practice, serving multiple sports clients, including the United States Golf Association, the National Basketball Association, the United States Tennis Association, and the United States Olympic Committee. He is the co-author of Deloitte's 2020 report entitled Games Without Fans: How Sports Organizations Can Thrive Now and in the Long Term. And he's also the co-author of the April 2020 report entitled Understanding the Impact of COVID-19 on Telecommunications, Media, and Entertainment Organizations. Mr. Switzer is a director of the Sports Business Group, Deloitte's Global Center of Excellence in the sports business. He has worked extensively in horse racing for more than 15 years and has produced multiple economic impact studies on racing, most notably in respect to British and Irish racing. Together, they'll discuss the findings from Deloitte's research and their experiences into the impact of COVID-19 on the sports sector. This will include looking at the practical steps that sports organizations can take to adapt to the new normal, opportunities arising from challenging circumstances, and how that advice can be tailored to horse racing organizations. Thank you for joining us for this year's keynote address, and please enjoy.
Hi, everybody. How are you? My name is Pete Giorgio. I'm a partner at Deloitte here in the United States. I run the sports business practice here in the US, where we do a lot of work with teams and leagues and various associations and things like that here in the US. And super excited to be with you guys today and to share a little bit of the outlook, but also want to introduce my colleague, Alan.
Thanks, Pete. I'm Alan Switzer. I'm a director in the Sports Business Group. We are the global center of sport in working and often working with Pete in the US side. So been in the group 20 years, and that's a particular specialty of mine is working in horse racing. And so I've worked with a number of you. So sorry we can't be there in person, maybe next year. But yeah, looking forward to having a conversation with Pete about how we respond to COVID.
Good. Yeah, and again, sorry we're not there, like Alan said, although I don't know, Alan, if you'd agree with me, but us on video may actually be better than us in person too. So we'll see how this goes. So
well, you're coming across better than myself, I mean, I've got a dodgy backdrop, but never mind.
I love it. Good. So we're going to try and make this as interactive as possible between the two of us. Obviously, we'd love it if we could be there with you and share questions, but we can't. But we'll make this interactive and try and go pretty quickly. The real question here is COVID, right? And how has that affected the sports industry? Obviously, all of us have gone through a whole bunch of change over the past year, unprecedented change in terms of what this outbreak has done to the industry, the challenges it has created, all of those things. But for me, the interesting part is I think the sport industry in general has demonstrated one of its greatest characteristics, which is the resilience that I think all of us sort of know is in our industries, our various industries, and know is part of that. But this thing has raised a lot of questions, things like how many of these changes are going to persist? What is this new world going to look like? I think everybody agrees that things aren't going back to quote unquote normal, but what does this new normal look like? And then how do we as people, as companies, as a society adapt to that and change things going forward? And specifically, as we think about thriving in this next era, what does this change around? What do we sell and how do we sell things? How do we operate our organizations? How do we forge stronger relationships with customers and things like that? All within a backdrop of there are some good things that have actually been illuminated, I think, by this crisis. Certainly the fact that there is a love and a need for sport out there. I think the fact that a lot of things, although horse racing, interestingly, was a little bit different, but globally, sport, the pause that a lot of these leagues and clubs and sports endured, both reinforced the fact that it kind of just created a hole in our heart, right? A hole in our heart for sport, for football, for basketball, for all of these things. And the interesting thing for me is as they come back, it's just reinforcing the importance of sport in society, in people's lives, in business as well. And so I do think there will be a silver lining in terms of what we're doing. But in order to take advantage of that and move forward, we have to think about how do we do things differently moving forward. And the big concerns that we've got to think about is how do we make fans feel safe returning to these live events? And this is not just for horse racing, this is for everything. There's a big question in a lot of sports of can fans return and are they allowed to return? And that's where a lot of people are thinking and spending a lot of time. But there is also this question, are they going to be comfortable even if they can return? And how do we think about that? A big thing that's come up, and I'm going to talk a lot about this, is how this is really accelerated and really pressed a lot of us on our digital tools. How do we think about our digital capabilities, our social media capabilities, our streaming capabilities, things like that in sports all over the globe, right? And then how do those tools and everything else we do help us think about a holistic data strategy? So the 6 quick things that Alan and I want to touch on as we think about this. First is a set of things about how to recover stronger than ever, right? So how do you sort of get through the next 6 months? How do you get through the next little bit of time and sort of recover and make sure you recover at a place of strength? And then secondly, over the long term, how do you thrive in this next era? How do we sort of think about thriving as we move forward? But again, specifically, I think within your industry, there's been some really interesting things that are happening. And again, sort of good resilience demonstrated. So Alan's going to talk quickly about what he's been seeing.
Thanks, Pete. So yeah, 4 quick things. One is, actually, horse racing didn't completely stop. Probably the only major sport that actually there was racing going on at somewhere in the world. I know from personal experience, I was getting up early to watch the racing from Hong Kong. I was recording it from Australia and watching it as live the next day. I was watching harness racing in Sweden. So, and I think that was really positive. Vast majority of the top races were protected. So kind of the protection of those, of the pattern of making sure that the real showcase races were still happening and actually supported the breeding industry as well, obviously, and kept the narrative of the sport going. I think that was a real credit to the sport to do that. You know, for when racing did come back, and it is back now virtually everywhere, all staged in a COVIDly secure manner. I think racing can legitimately look at itself as being the best practice there in terms of going forward. Hopefully, going forward, that will be less of an issue, but as and when we need to do COVIDly secure approach, I think racing's demonstrated it can absolutely do that. And one thing definitely was coming through, and I know racing's been talking, we've been talking a lot about working more globally together, about commingling, world bets, and it's tough. Like, it's tough to make that stuff happen. It's complex, but there was definitely more cooperation going on, that actually more betting operators were offering odds and betting across the globe. So I was migrating my British and Irish racing spend to Hong Kong and to Australia. So I think we want to keep some of that. We want to keep some of that going whenever we're all racing again for mutual benefit. So we'll come back to that a little bit, but just a few perspectives of what I was seeing.
Good, love it. Thanks, Alan. So again, the question is a lot of folks have kind of, at least globally in a lot of sports, we've gone through this period of just reacting. How do we react? How do we get a season going? How do we get athletes back on the court, on the pitch, things like that? We're now moving into this phase of what do I do over the next, short little while to sort of come back again stronger? And the big thing that that we're seeing all over the place in many sports is this embracing of digital, stay connected to fans, right? How do you use your digital capabilities to, in a world where fans are not in the stands, and here in the US and elsewhere as well, we still don't completely have fans. We have some fans in the stands and some fans coming back, but not to anything near what we're going to have. And it's unclear when that's going to come back. So how do you use those digital channels? How do you use social? How do you use streaming? Things like that. Not just to broadcast, not just to share content, but how do you pivot those channels to really start making relationships with fans, to actually get that interaction, to get that back and forth, so you can really create that type of bond that previously we only created in the live setting. How do we create that in the digital setting too? And specifically to racing, there's a few thoughts as well that Alan's got on this particular topic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's that. How do you keep those stories going throughout the year? So it's not just about that 90-second race and then a break. It's about actually building a bond with the performers, the jockeys primarily, who have a voice and are getting better and better, I think, at kind of telling their stories and bringing it alive. Our equine friends can't talk, but we can tell their stories, and we should make more of their stories. And we're definitely getting better at doing that through social media as well. And I think actually just that whole idea now about in a troubled world where global travel is difficult at the minute, still getting some of our superstar horses traveling the world and racing up against each other is a really strong message, a really strong story. And I think we'll see some of that in Paris clearly over the weekend. So I think telling that story, being proud and telling that story bigger and better, I think that's got to have the benefits as well.
Good. Although here in the U.S. we did have an equine who could talk Mr. Ed on TV, so maybe we should ask him, Alan. So, as you're thinking about building these digital channels and engaging with fans, the other thing we need to start thinking about is that to date, in a lot of sports around the world, there's been one digital experience, one sort of way to engage with the team digitally. We now need to think about how do we create different tiers of this, right? We're seeing this a little bit in the US, especially with the NBA, in terms of what they're doing in terms of bringing fans, quote unquote, digitally to the court side. So I'm not sure folks have seen that, but they've worked to actually bring video of fans in almost like a fan and stadium setting on the sidelines in new and different ways. And they sell that as a ticket, right? They sell that as a ticket through the same channels that they've been selling tickets before. But how do you create these new different tiers that a lot of our fans are used to in terms of having differentiated access to what's going on? And on the racing side, Alan?
Yeah, I think it's about bringing more things together, about actually enriching the content on those remote experiences. I'm just saying, has anybody really cracked the app market racing? I'm sure some of you are shouting at the screen saying, yeah, we do a pretty good job. But it's pretty competitive out there. There are some fantastic sports apps. So you do need to invest. I think everyone needs to work together better as well. So, contributing different bits of content to mix them together just provides a more powerful product.
Yeah. And it'll take an industry like yours to settle on things like a vocabulary about how you describe it and what are the different types of tiers that exist in other sports. So I do think collaboration will be super important. Again, and this is a little bit, actually horse racing, I think, has done a great job of this in a lot of aspects. But, globally, as sports think about this, they're actually thinking about how do they actually think about all of their different channels and manage them actually all in very similar ways. It's no longer a world where our broadcast is our primary and it's our only. Broadcast is still vastly important, super important, but a lot of these organizations think about what are the other channels, right? Whether it be for the live content or clips or other content as well that we want to share. How do we become not just a primary channel producer, but a multi-channel producer as we sort of think about these things and creates all sorts of options for our fans to engage our content?
And I think it's about innovation, isn't it? It's about actually just finding of new creative ways of showcasing it across media, across multiple platforms. If we're losing a bit of that wow factor at some points because we don't have the 60,000, 80,000 people in the background, what are the smart things we can do? What's the use of data we can do better? What's the use of kind of close-ups of jockey cams, all that stuff, which was happening anyway. But I think if not, this places even greatest onus on that innovation.
So those are the things we think about in the short term. I do think there's also, as all of you think about, how do we sort of think about this next era? How are we going to operate differently in the new normal? What's going to be different? And you'll see some similar themes. But again, I do think the industry, we operate sport in general, an industry that is used to transformation, that is used to actually sort of thinking about how do we think about the next era? How do we do this differently moving forward? Again, we talked a little bit about that resilience, right? How does this change? A lot of sports are using this as an opportunity to think about all of those things that we've kind of wanted to do in the past and have thought about doing. This gives us an opportunity to do that. There's a great quote that's attributed to a bunch of people, but never let a good crisis go to waste. And so if you think about what are those big things that we've always wanted to tackle, but we've never had that burning platform to do so, this is that opportunity. How do we think differently about what a season is? How do we think differently about what a broadcast is? How do we think differently about better aligning with our partners and thinking about new ways to employ technology and things like that? Now's the time to ask those questions. Now is the opportunity to sort of take a half step back and think about what is the long-term play and what do we want to do over the long term?
Yeah, it's funny you're having those conversations. We're having those conversations with sports. Some very major sports. We're having some of those conversations together, obviously. Some very major sports that actually you might look at from the outside and think are doing pretty well, and they are. But even they are looking to make quite transformational changes. Even they are looking to use this as an opportunity to get those things they just haven't been able to do. So my sort of plea is, look, we all have minor issues, minor now, I think, when we look back, and differences that actually stop some of those things from happening. Now is the time to forget about those and kind of make those big, bold changes, basically, for the benefit of the whole sport. Be aware you may get approached for investment by other parties, because we're seeing private equity and new types of investors coming into sport. It's happening anyway, but they're definitely sensing an opportunity as well at the minute. That can be good, but only if that investment aligns with your medium, long-term aspirations and direction of the sport as well. So there is sometimes a bit of a danger of short-term gain, financial gain, with a financial long-term pain, basically. So just a little bit of beware of that investment. There's some great opportunities, but equally there are some pitfalls to avoid as well.
I love it. I mean, again, over the long term, we talked a little bit about this earlier. We need to reestablish trust and safety at venues. Trust is a big thing that will be on the top of mind of not just in sport, by the way, over the next 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years. It's going to be a big part of any consumer related brand. How do we reestablish trust? How do we convince consumers or fans, in this case, that we have their well-being number one on our list of things that we're worried about? How do we lure them back, make them comfortable, make them re-engage in a way that we want, and really, think about that from a bunch of different standpoints. It's personal well-being, it's trust with their data, it's all of these things that are going to be important. There's also a big thing that's important as well that we're seeing a lot in the US is actually the trust of our athletes, right? The trust of our employees, right? As we ask folks to come back to venues, to almost be on the front lines of some of these things, as we sort of bring fans back into the stands, as we ask athletes to start participating in these things and trust in the various leagues around the world, and the various organizations that, again, we've got their best interests at heart, and we're really trying to do this in a way that really puts them at the forefront and makes them feel comfortable with what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think racing's got an advantage here. So we've got a lot of open space. We've already demonstrated we can put racing on behind closed doors safely, but there are very strong arguments that we can put it on when we're allowed to come back as well. And it's about just demonstrating that, lobbying government, because there will be barriers. We've all seen them. But we can put a very strong case that we can race securely with fans and just put that on. I think we're all kind of itching to get back there, but some people might be a bit more nervous about just giving them that security.
Yep. Good. And then lastly, again, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but everybody should be thinking about what is our long-term data play. how do we rethink the way we use and operate, collect, leverage data moving forward? And this is not just one of the things we talk a lot about when we talk about data is a lot of folks are collecting data now and using it. And it's informative, right? It's actually informative. It kind of gives you some high level stats about what's happening in a way that gives you another view of what's happening. We really need to shift to actually making that data insightful. How does that data become something that we can use and sort of think about, and actually gives us real insight into the business that allows us make decisions differently. And then moving forward, what we really need to do is make that data actionable. How do you make that data actionable? How do you use it in new and different ways to actually take action and do things that you weren't allowed to do or couldn't do before? All within the constructs of everything that's happening with GDPR and all the sort of data regulations, certainly with the general public's privacy interests and concerns, with all the cyber concerns that exist out there as well. And so, but I do think everybody in any sport right now needs to be thinking of what's my long-term data play? How am I going to use it? How is it going to enhance my existing revenue streams? But also, how is it going to create new revenue streams for me moving forward?
Yeah, all of what Pete said is absolutely right. And one thing racing is not short of is data. You know, we've got reams and reams of it and fascinating data, and people can choose the depth to which they want to go. And we can apply that from a pure equine and racing perspective or from the betting perspective. So there are definitely opportunities out there. Let's keep the progress that's been made already in the last 6 months around global cooperation. Let's keep that going, regardless of when we beat this disease.
Good. Again, I'll just reinforce where I started a little bit. I do think that this virus, while it has created lots of challenges for us, it has actually created lots of opportunities as well. And again, it's just reinforced and shown a spotlight on the importance of sport. So again, I do think it's going to be, the challenging times will continue. I do think we're going to have to be ready for a new normal, but definitely something for us to keep in mind and something to keep pushing on as we move forward. So thank you guys for spending some time with us today. Hopefully this was a little bit helpful. Please, as always, if you have additional questions or concerns about any of these things, please reach out to Alan or I. I think Alan is pretty excited about some of the pictures on this page too.
Well, I'm very excited about watching it over the weekend remotely. Even more excited about watching it in person, hopefully next year.
Yeah, so it was great spending time with everybody. Again, thank you again. Pete Giorgio from Deloitte. Thanks again for the time. My colleague Alan from our practice in the UK as well. Have a good day. Thank you.
Have a good day.